All right, we are live. Hello, welcome everybody. So it's been a while since I've uploaded to the channel, but I thought this was a good occasion to do so. I'm back today with one of my best friends, Jack, and we're going to be talking about the movie Point Break, which we both love. But I have to admit, Jack, I'm pretty sure you love this movie more than I do.
I think I have to love it more than you do. This is probably my favorite movie of all time, and I've seen it countless times. I was saying to you earlier that sometimes I'll be in the middle of watching the movie and have the urge to see scenes from earlier in the movie and want to go back to, the first time he learns to surf, 30 minutes after he first learns to surf. When was the last time you saw this movie before you watched it most recently? I'm about 100% positive I've seen it this calendar year, and I think during quarantine.
I think it was actually in the last year or so that I watched it, but I'm not sure I finished it. I think I watched the first hour because watching it this time, the first hour was very familiar. And then right up to the point where, basically he shoots the gun in the air after the foot chase. After that, there were some things that I was surprised by again. I didn't remember this part this vividly. So I think I must have watched half of it recently. And I think total, I probably watched this movie maybe half a dozen times, on TV, on DVD, on Blu-ray. And this time was streaming and a couple of other times like that. But how many times do you think you've seen this over the years?
I think I've probably legitimately seen it over 100 times.
Is this your favorite movie? Top of the
It's my favorite movie. I think it's the movie I most enjoy. And I also really think it's a great movie. I think it's a great movie. Is it as serious as, I don't know, something that, is about capitalism and its influence on our personal lives and on the system in which we exist, like The Godfather or There Will Be Blood? No, I don't think it's good in that same kind of way. But I do think the cinematography is incredible. I think that the storytelling is really, really good. I think all the acting performances are in general pretty good. So I think it's a really good movie, and I definitely think it's the movie that I most enjoy watching. The thing that's interesting to me is that I constantly see this movie in other places. I'm watching other stuff. I'm like, oh, that's Point Break. Oh, that's Point Break.
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of other people watch Point Break on TBS on a Saturday afternoon, and they're like, wait a minute, is that the place from Fast and Furious? You know what I mean? Or
right.
And I think that almost it's kind of so iconic within its own subgenre, right? You have Jordan Peele making a movie called Keanu about this period in his career, this speed, these kinds of movies. It's so iconic to a certain group of people, and it's so heavily influencing so many things that a lot of people that watch this movie again are like, oh, wait a minute, that's where that's from. So did you have any experiences like that when you were watching this where you're like, oh yeah, that's what that's from?
Actually, what you said about the Fast and the Furious, that's kind of an obvious one. That's what I was thinking about immediately about this is even when they did the Honest Trailer YouTube parody of this, they talk about all the easy comparisons that you can make between this and the Fast and the Furious. And it to a certain extent, even down to the point where they're drinking the same beer, they're drinking Corona in this movie and they're drinking Corona in the Fast and the Furious. It has to be on purpose, right? To a certain extent, when they're making the Fast and the Furious, they're redoing Point Break on purpose.
So I think you probably already know this, but the place that Keanu Reeves, Johnny Utah, meets Tyler is the place that they go in Fast and Furious 1 on their kind of drive on the afternoon.
Is that Patrick's Roadhouse? Is that the name of the place?
No, that was another great one. It's Neptune's Net. Neptune's Net, which is, kind of an iconic setting for Point Break. And then they very purposefully go out of their way in Fast and Furious. If there's anything in Fast and Furious that is a little bit out of place, it's the date in the middle of the movie. It's just a straight up date. Yeah. And, I don't know, but, so yeah, I think it's really intentional, the relationship between those two movies.
Mm-hmm.
But even in less, broad ways than the way that movie is related to this movie, I just think about some of these different tropes. You think about Heat, obviously iconic with the bank robbers, and that's certainly influential on movies like The Town and Inside Man, but I also see a lot of flashes of some of the Point Break stuff. I don't know. I really enjoy this movie. I think it's very influential. When you think about this movie and other movies, what are some of the other things you think about besides Fast and the Furious that have a relationship to this?
Well, that's really the only one that, I mean, preparing for this, that's the only one I was thinking about consciously. Otherwise, I was just thinking about the director, Kathryn Bigelow's, like her other work and comparing like what she did here to the other movies I've seen by her. So I'm curious, like, before we even talk about that, what is your answer to that? Because probably it'll like be a light bulb moment for me. Like, where are the other movies that are like doing Point Break stuff that I'm sure obvious once I hear them.
The most important one is definitely Fast and Furious, which basically is a shot for shot remake of the story, changing out a couple of pieces. Mm-hmm. But the second most important one, which is really, really enjoyable, is the classic Simon Pegg movie with Nick Frost. What is that
is
film?
It Hot Fuzz? Is that what we're talking about?
Hot Fuzz, yeah. All right. Hot Fuzz, which sort of both consciously and unconsciously is engaged with Point Break. They talk about Point Break as the epitome of being a police officer, and then they, for comedic effect, reshoot a number of the scenes. There's the iconic hedge jumping scene where Reagan, the bank robber, is being chased down by Johnny Utah. And, you know, the audience, I think by this point knows that it's Johnny Utah and it's Bodhi, but they remake that in Hot Fuzz. And so that's definitely one that owes a lot to it. And then I think the other movie that weirdly owes a lot to it is the Tron Legacy movie. Okay. I think that that is a similar kind of purpose self-discovery thing that's more related to Point Break than a lot of people would realize.
That's interesting. I mean, the Tron connection I didn't see before. The Tron one, I think, is a lot more like Tron's definitely a movie about like saving your father from the belly of the whale, like that sort of Jordan Peterson or even biblical reference, Jonah and the whale sort of thing. And I don't know, even though I just watched Point Break the other day, I don't know if like parents or family is as big like a thematic element of this one.
Yeah.
And that actually makes me, it's one of those things that, you know, not every movie covers, especially not every action movie. But now I'm thinking like, if we had gotten to like Point Break 5, like if this had become a franchise, would there be that scene of what the protagonist and the other protagonist talking about the beer and the barbecue in their family?
Well, okay. So I think this is really going into the place of what is this movie about? And I think when you talk about what this movie's about, from that point, it's really easy to see how it has to differ from some of these other pieces. So for me, this movie is almost exclusively about like the soul self. Like it's just about Johnny Utah, and really everybody else in the movie, Tyler, Bodhi, Pappas, the FBI, the other bank robbers, the other surfers, they're really just tools in the journey that Johnny Utah is on by himself. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's one of the things that's so interesting about the love story in this movie. And a lot of people make jokes about where the real love story is here, but it really is just about him alone. And so it's very strange for me even to think about how he's able to kind of fall in love with Tyler as this is all going on. But for you, what is Point Break about?
Well, okay, so this was clear to me just from the very first, like the title credits when they're having the comparison between Johnny Utah. Say it again. What?
The crosscuts.
Oh yeah, the crosscuts of the surfing, which I'm not sure if that's like Bodhi surfing or just someone surfing, and definitely Johnny Utah at the police training or the FBI training. You know, he's becoming a blue flame special in the line, the phrase they have repeated early on in the movie a couple times. That's what I had to look up, but apparently just, it's easy once you Google it. You know, a blue flame is just a flame that burns its brightest. So it's just someone he's a tryhard. But, you know, to the comparison, the contrast at the beginning is interesting to me because it's like the natural world. These people are, you know, it's a challenge, like catch the wave. But there's no one at the end that says, like the training officer literally says, "Good job, Utah." It's like
It
there's
says
no
100% or something like that. He's like, Utah, 100%.
Yeah. There's
Yeah.
like no one there giving you a good grade at the end of it. So it's like, to me, that's like this thematic contrast between, you know, the life of Bodhi and the life of Utah. It's like Bodhi's doing it ultimately for him. And I think he's misnamed, or it's like he's misnamed on purpose, because Bodhisattva is, I wrote this down, it's like, you know, someone who could reach nirvana, but they stay behind to help other lost souls. And I don't see him doing that. I don't think that that's what he's doing at all. So, you know, it's like, if they named him that for that reason, I think it's on the nose, like a purposeful misname. But it's definitely, you know, he's in it for himself. It's the natural world. He's doing what he wants to do, versus Johnny Utah plays nice. He plays within the bounds of society. And, you know, he's kind of a loose cannon at points. And, well, not so much him, but his partner does, you know, punch out their superior officer near the end of the movie, punches out John C. McGinley. But yeah, just to answer the question you asked a couple minutes ago, that was, to me, early on. It's like, okay, it's easy to see this on a rewatch. This is what we're comparing here. Like the natural world of, you know, do what thou wilt, make the most of whatever you want to do in life, versus here's a path to success. And here's someone at the end of it telling you you're doing a good job, or you're a blue light special, or, you know, there's a funny scene that's like cut from the trailer that's not in the movie, where he like goes into the FBI office with a surfboard, and John C. McGinley like says in the trailer, I think, like, "You're not here to pick up chicks." And he's like, "I believe the terminology is babes." And it's like, but, you know, it's like there's times where it's like he's winning, he's losing, but it's these sort of external forces telling him when he's winning or losing, versus discovering it from within. What do you think about that?
No, I think that's really on the money. I also think, you know, you kind of have, in Johnny Utah being the former star Ohio State quarterback, a little bit more of a prototype for who Johnny Utah is from like 15 to when we meet him at 25, right? Mm-hmm. Like, if this guy's the star quarterback for Ohio State when they're playing in the Rose Bowl, well, that means they're one of the best teams that season. And if he's playing for Ohio State, he was one of the best high school, you know what I mean? So we can kind of make these assumptions. And then when football doesn't work out, Johnny Utah doesn't end up selling, you know, used cars. Johnny Utah goes to law school and then the FBI. So we've got, I think, a pretty good idea of who Johnny Utah is. And kind of, although he says it to Tyler as a part of his cover, you know, he's done everything for everybody else, and he finally came out to the ocean. He wants to do something for himself. I do think that there's a little bit of that going on, where Bodhi plays for Bodhi, and Bodhi has like the task of existence to handle, and he's trying to handle this most important task of what does it mean to exist. And Keanu's been like, yeah, I'll be a star quarterback, I'll be an FBI agent, I'll you know, completed JD, whatever. And then I also think there's a little bit of a, you know, what determines final order? Is it the natural world or is it man? And so Johnny is, as the law, trying to put order back with his own force and might, and then literal physical force and might. And surfing is a little bit more like, hey, there is a cycle, man. There's a 50-year storm. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I think that that's definitely going on. Can we talk through the characters of this movie? Yeah. And maybe when we meet him, because you talked about John C. McGinley, and this is one of my favorite scenes in the whole thing. He shows up and he's talking about how they do things, and Johnny Utah says, "Cut the skin off my chicken, sir." And then that scene finishes with him eating a donut, and McGinley is just disgusted. And, you know, we see in this moment that, yeah, Keanu is all these things we need him to be. I mean, you know, we know what he looks like, star, whatever, but he's also kind of sticking it to authority. Mm-hmm. And Keanu actually makes this movie in between the two Bill and Teds. He does another Bill and Ted after this movie. So in terms of him as like the surfer, and he's eating the donut to stick it to the officer and this, that, and the other, like he's literally still playing rebellious characters when he takes this role. Meeting Keanu, obviously we then go into meeting Pappas, which is iconic.
Mhm. You mentioned real quick about the Bill and Ted thing. That was really interesting because on one side of this movie, the week before it comes out, Terminator 2 comes out. So that was still number one at the box office week 2 when Point Break premieres. And then the week after Point Break premieres, which I think it premieres at like number 4 at the box office, Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey comes out literally the week after Point Break. So I'm not sure what exactly the filming order was, like if he did Point Break and then did Bill and Ted or vice versa. But it's crazy like how close all 3 of those movies are to each other in release because of the people involved.
Yeah.
And you know, like we haven't talked about this yet, but like at the time, Kathryn Bigelow was married to James Cameron, and he had like an uncredited draft of the screenplay. Like he helped with the final form of the story, but you know, because of like Writers Guild rules, he doesn't have like credit for that. And he's also, I think, a producer on the movie. But we'll come back around to that. Like what we were just talking about, though, in terms of, I love that line. I wrote that down too. I take the skin off chicken. And I wasn't actually sure, even though I've seen this movie a couple times, I wasn't sure how to read that, where he like tells his boss what he wants to hear, but then immediately has a donut. And I mean, when I watched it, it just seemed like, you say McGinley seems disgusted. And I don't know. I thought like maybe he was going along with it. Like he sees him eat the donut and he's like, oh, this kid's got a sense of humor. And like, but you're saying just like outright, he does not like that.
McKinley is not here for your nonsense. The way that McKinley gets things done is crunching data. That's what they do. Like he's literally a by the book guy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not going to be a fit for Utah, who is kind of a renegade. Speaking of Kathryn Bigelow, talking about the cinematography, that shot with McGinley is an incredible and acrobatic one take. Mm-hmm. The camera work in this movie is really acrobatic, but that oneer introducing McGinley as kind of the man and Utah as somebody that's going to stick it to the man, I thought was really, really impressive. I love that opening. And then I feel like we meet Pappas next, which is a little bit like a real like, hey, this is a unique world that you're in. You thought you were watching this FBI bank robber movie, but this is a strange spot. Talk about the meeting of Pappas and Busey in the pool.
So both those actors, McGinley and Gary Busey as Pappas, this is one of the challenges I think of watching this movie. If you're going to watch it for the first time now, like 20 or 30 years removed, it's weird because those actors went on to basically become parodies of themselves. Like John C. McGinley is probably most well known now as being like this character, but on a sitcom on Scrubs, like the doctor on Scrubs. And like Gary Busey's famous for being crazy Gary Busey. So like that, and I guess also the issue of the trope, just the tropes in general, like if any other movie is going to borrow from this movie, that has the potential, I think, for taking away from like the ability to suspend disbelief or treat this as a serious action movie rather than like as like a strange sort of proto satire. Like it's
right.
But in terms of the question of like meeting Pappas for the first time, I mean, you buy it. It's like, again, if you can buy into the fact that this was actually made as a serious film, like as a serious action film, like if you get past that, the issue at the front door of accepting that Gary Busey is here playing an actual role and not just pretending to be himself on an episode of Entourage, then I buy it. Like this is definitely like the grizzled older partner. I mean, that kind of feeds into an existing trope for a cop film anyway.
Sure. Yeah. I think he's wacky. Like he's so distinct in his vocal patterns. And as you're saying, he later, parodies this, but he's just so funky. And I think one of the things that's so good about this script is the dialogue is all really funky. Like everybody talks in a really stylized way. Mm-hmm. And, he's like, oh, some quarterback punk. And then Keanu's like, punk quarterback. You know what I mean? It's very stylized dialogue. And when he does the kind of sideways flip in the Speedo into the pool, to pick up these bricks, which he thinks is so stupid. Like, man, what a way to meet him and the FBI. And from that scene, we kind of tumble into the action, really. I'm not clear on how much time is passing in the early stages of this movie. At one point, Pappas is breaking down his theory for the robbers and says, you know, we've got a month until they leave town. So I think that the movie roughly takes place within a month, but kind of out of meeting Pappas, we tumble into the action pretty quick.
Well, in terms of the overall timeline, I think like the linchpin there, again, if you want to approach it from a believable angle, is like, how long could he keep this sort of scam relationship with Tyler going on? Because it's like, if you barely know somebody, or if you've just met them, you can like have this mask of, you know, a fake personality, or, you know, in his case, especially like a fake job. But she eventually does find it out, and it seems like it's plausible for, you know, him to get away with that for a couple weeks at the most before she figures something out. And then, you know, she does and pulls a gun on him.
In terms of a modern day problem with this movie, although there are a bunch, he immediately gives her his full real name without her asking. So we meet the robbers, which actually I think is framed really well. We go right kind of in media res to them pulling off a robbery, but at the end of that scene, we pull back to see that actually this is Pappas showing footage to Utah for the first time of these guys before they go to work this case. And we meet them, they get onto the case, they kind of have this epic blowout at the drop car, looking out over LA, where Keanu is screaming at him, "Are you mad? Are you mad?" And it's great. And we kind of have the beginning, I would say, of the real partnership kind of following that. But after we go and we meet these characters and we get rolling into the action, Johnny starts surfing. And I think that the believability is more solid than it seems. There's not actually as many places to surf in LA as you might think. I think that's one of the things that I hear people bring up all the time. It's like, isn't it kind of crazy that he ended up on the same beach as this guy's girlfriend? It's like, it's not that crazy. There's not that many beaches. There's like a dozen or so, you know, kind of in the whole zone. So that's not that weird. He's super athletic. He's a quarterback. It makes sense to me he'd pick up surfing in a day. I think he's likable. He's a locker room kind of guy. It makes sense that he kind of befriend these dudes. You know, Bodhi likes that he's got some spunk. And then those guys as bank robbers, you know, I find the whole thing like relatively believable, kind of from the beginning of the movie up until he and Pappas are staking out the bank robbery. I think that's all pretty solid. How did you feel about the credibility of the plotting?
I never questioned it. And I think it's like, it's really, I can remember back to seeing it the first time. I don't remember all the circumstances the first time I saw the movie, but I remember it being engaging and, you know, to your word, incredible. Like I believed it. And like every time I rewatch it, it doesn't become less credible. It doesn't it never really stretches disbelief outside of, you know, there's like people who say the stunts, like they did a Mythbusters, I think, about this, where it's like you couldn't actually jump out and be like having a conversation in the air where you got a gun to someone's head. But, you know, even if I hadn't heard that outside of the context of the movie, for example, I never would have questioned it. And like in terms of character motivations and everything, or where they're going to be, like what beach they're going to be at, or if like someone like War Child is going to show up and like pick a fight with Johnny Utah, I never questioned any of that. It all tracks to me from beginning to end. It's maybe some of the more incredible things are, again, this was like, you sent me this link to a book, Feminist Hollywood, by I think Christina Lane is the author's name. And she had essays in here about female directors and, you know, writing about Catherine Bigelow. I didn't notice this in the rewatch either, but there's a statement in this essay about how Johnny Utah recognizes one of the butts of the robbers. Do you remember this bit?
Yeah, well, okay. So there's a really bizarre, so Utah embeds himself with Bodhi's crew and is also separately tracking Warchild's crew, which has, this is a really great misdirect. It has all of the makings of they're complete assholes. They're bad news. They only live to get radical, as Bodhi puts it. They get this huge rap sheet, a house full of guns. Like, of course they're the guys in some way. And then it turns out they're not the guys. Utah's a little lost. He goes surfing on the beach, and what Lane is talking about in this essay is kind of some of the, like, not even latent, but just kind of like straight outright in the text homoeroticism of the movie. And what happens is Johnny Utah, in almost a like male gazy kind of way, is like watching them surf together, the four of them, and kind of sees the rhythm of them together. And then when I think Roach moons him, he's like, oh shit, that's the same move that they did in the first bank robbery, but they had written thank you on the guy's ass. And so, yeah, kind of his epiphany about who the real bandits are is brought on by the memorable sight of one of the crew's ass.
That is, again, that's the thing that's probably more confusing on a rewatch, is I know who everyone is at the beginning. So it wasn't clear to me when I'm watching it this time, like, oh, when does everybody figure out, like, when does Bodhi know that Johnny's a cop? And when does Johnny know for sure that Bodhi's the bank robber? Can you answer that question? I mean, do you know for sure when they
I think I know
out?
For sure.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Johnny realizes in that moment, oh man, it's them.
Okay.
It's been here this whole time. And that's why he leaves. He makes up the thing about, oh, I got a new client, I got to meet, I got to jam. Bodhi, I think, is the only one that knows it's Johnny when he first pulls the gun on them outside of the bank that he and Pappas are staking out.
Okay.
And so there's a scene where Reagan tells the other guy not to shoot and takes kind of like an extended glance at Utah. And it's pretty clear in that moment that that's Bodhi recognizing Utah. And then certainly by the time they're in the chase, Bodhi realizes that it's Utah. So it's not until the robbery that he realizes Utah is a special agent. But the thing that's kind of so unique about the relationship between Bodhi and Utah is that, for real, that's the love story. Those are the two people that find connection and have a really important experience together. And kind of like from the first time Bodhi meets him, he sees that Utah is kind of on some of the same wavelength that he's on about figuring out what this whole thing means to be alive. And so their relationship is kind of transcended him being an FBI agent and him being on the run by the time they realize who each other are. Like, they've already got, more going on. So it's pretty wild. It's unique.
So is that like, I mean, does that answer in part the question of why Bodhi is willing to put Tyler, have Tyler kidnapped and like make her potentially like a murder victim, because he's more concerned that Johnny survives than Tyler?
I think he's definitely more concerned that Johnny survives than Tyler, but I don't know if I totally believe that Tyler is at risk.
Okay. He distances himself from it, like Patrick Swayze, Bodhi. He says, it's not me. I could never do it, but Rosie's going to do it. So.
And maybe not. I don't know. I'm not that convinced that he would do it. But again, like, I think it's a little bit immaterial. I mean, it's kind of neither here nor there whether he would or wouldn't do it, because it's really just about Utah and Bodhi's relationship. And that relationship is really sparked by the football scene on the beach. So let's talk about Johnny, Utah, meeting this crew of guys and then immediately getting to quarterback one of the two teams. I think this is perhaps the least believable thing in the movie. Now, after they realize that he's the former star quarterback, yeah, sure, you let him play quarterback, but I've played in about 100 pickup football games with random dudes, and the guy that knows the least people never gets to be quarterback. Like, that's just not the way that it works. Because whoever is going to be quarterback is going to be liked by most of the guys. So that's pretty unbelievable. But talk about the beach scene.
Well, first of all, just in terms of production, more trivia, all from the IMDb page. Same beach as in The Karate Kid, apparently.
That's amazing.
Which I had also seen. I saw that one for the first time this year when that came to 4K. And well, not just the beach scene here, but like all the water scenes really make me, I want a 4K version of Point Break now. Well, I've always wanted it, but I really want it now. Like I'm sure you said you were watching the Blu-ray version, and I'm sure the quality is better than the streaming version I was watching. But I think there's more that we could see in this film that, has been lost since the original.
Are you talking about Keanu's unit that we do almost see at one point in the film? Is that what you want to see via the Blu-ray? No. I was shocked. He's injured with his knee after the fight with Bodhi, and I don't know why he needed to be nude for that scene, but he lunges after Tyler as she runs out, and we literally almost get full frontal nudity from Keanu. I was blown away in seeing the Blu-ray. That was what most struck me about the visual. I was like, geez, Louise. So no, I don't want to go up in quality. I've got all the quality I can handle on the movie. That being said, it's such a beautiful movie that I would, the bigger the screen, the better the sound, great. The sound actually, I think, is something we could talk about as maybe being a problem, the score. I don't think you should remake the movie. Did they? Yeah, not for me.
That's interesting.
We'll talk about that.
One thing on the score real quick. I know it was done by Mark Isham, and he's probably not famous for it, but his other movies are mostly Jean-Claude Van Damme movies. Like he did the score for Time Cop, Nowhere to Run, some other, films in this same sort of genre. But he's not, nothing in here really blows me away as like, it doesn't make me emotional. It doesn't like move me in the way that like a great score I think would. So are you saying
I think there's a couple
here?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of moments where the score is a big negative. It's like, oh geez, we need to fix this. This is bad. I think that on the whole, the movie is not particularly dated. I think it really holds up well, especially because nobody watches a movie from 1991 and thinks like, why don't they use Google? That's insane. But the score is bad. Like, I think it's a very good aesthetic experience from this movie on the whole, but the score piece of that aesthetic experience is lacking in a number of like kind of really critical moments. In any case, the beach scene where Utah tackles Bodhi and Bodhi pops up, if you got tackled like that by a guy that you didn't know that was clearly trying to sleep with your seemingly recent ex-girlfriend, what's your reaction?
I would hate it. My reaction is I would hate it. I'd hate every part of it, but I'm not radical. Like I always accepted that as like, that's just part of Bodhi's character is like, he's such a wild man that I guess, he senses this like kindred spirit or this seed of a renegade within Johnny, like almost like, this guy's such a loose cannon. It'll be fun to hang out with him because I just like crazy people. Like, even the crazy people like War Child all seem to have like some amount of respect for Bodhi. Like he's, the king of the Lost Boys essentially. So that just seemed like to track for his character that, he gets tackled into the ocean surf and he's like, finally, someone who's operating on my level. So that all seemed fine for me, but yeah, personally, I would hate it, but I wouldn't be there in the first place.
No, I agree completely. I think that's 100% a part of who Bodhi is. And also I think that it's a little bit of the Bodhi thing to not get angry at all. My dog's very wired up. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
But, I think that's the Bodhi thing because he is the Zen master, right? The next big Zen moment with Bodhi is obviously when he explains what the meaning of life is and the ultimate ride. Do you think that for most 25-year-olds, the Bodhi philosophy is pretty compelling? Because if I think about myself when I'm, a few years removed from college, maybe in my first real job, there's a certain kind of malaise about what you've been told to believe in, getting married, having kids, house in the cul-de-sac type thing that sets in for a lot of 25-year-old men. I feel like the Bodhi philosophy is pretty captivating. It's real. And maybe one of the reasons that this movie continues to endure, because guys see this movie and they're like, yeah, man, forget the system. I'm going to join Bodhi and surf.
Yeah, I think it's like superficially tempting, but I don't think anyone could actually go along with the whole thing. And it's like, for example, like this is, to me, like the house party is an example of this, where it's like there's, I think it's a PJ O'Rourke line, or, probably a lot of people have said something similar, where there's only, one sure place to have a party, and that's someone else's place. And so if he's willing, he has the line I wrote down, make yourself at home, what's mine is yours. And again, that's just like, that's not me. Like, I would rather go someplace else to party and like it becomes a mess, and then I go home and my house is still, my literal house is in order. Versus I think it's, again, to answer the question, I think it's tempting for a 25-year-old to say like, oh, I want to be free, but like up to a certain point, like I just want to have like a wild night and then go back to safety.
Well, that's kind of what's so perfect about this movie, is because you're like, yeah, man, forget the system. I'm going on the ride with Utah. And then the movie's over and you kind of go back to life, as is. The Bodhi philosophy aside, what happens to Utah after the events of this movie? I said earlier that I think when you think about what this movie's really about, it's easy to understand, why it would go in different directions than some of these other movies. What happens to Utah after Bells Beach, Australia?
Well, again, to make the Fast and Furious comparison, it's a lot easier to figure out like what happens to Paul Walker, what happens to Brian O'Connor, because we have like 6 sequels that deal with him after Point Break's over. And they did, I guess at one point, I think around 93, 20th Century Fox had a budget of like 90 million to put at a Point Break 2.
Oh my gosh.
But they didn't go through with it. So that never happened. So it's like, we just have to, it's one of those endings where he throws the badge in the water in the surf down in Australia. And it's like, what does happen to him next? Does he run away to Miami and start racing cars? I don't know. It's like, it's so much, obviously it's more mysterious than the Fast and the Furious, because they did make a sequel to that answered the question for that franchise. It would have been, I don't think either one of us saw the remake, right? You didn't see the 2015 version of Point Break. I didn't see it. You have no interest in seeing it, right?
No, I wouldn't see it. It's not for me. Yeah.
It would have been interesting as, rather than a remake, an in-universe sequel to like bring back, to touch on it again 25 years later. And what is this disgraced former Blue Flame special up to at that point in his life? Or even make the story about other characters and give him a cameo as the guy who owns the surf shop now. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's my best guess, is that he goes and buys Patrick's Roadhouse or Neptune's Net or whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think I bring everything back to Hamlet. Everything is Hamlet for me. Okay. But it's a little bit also true for Keanu Reeves. And I think there's maybe even a touch of that in some of the Swayze temperament. And for me, Utah makes the choice when he doesn't shoot Bodhi that he's done. Like he's out at that point for me, in terms of whatever his old way of living was. Now he's on kind of a different trip. And then by the end of the movie, I sort of see him discarding the badge as, now I'm free from any obligation to any of that FBI stuff. And now I'm just doing me. And I think it is really odd to think about, like, well, what does that mean? Like, is he Denzel Washington in The Equalizer? Like, what is he going to do? Like, is he just going to surf? What's going to happen? Because these guys, in order to surf this kind of endless summer lifestyle, had to rob banks. I want to talk about how much money it would take for 4 guys to live traveling between for example, in a calendar year, here I have in my notes, Sumatra, Fiji, and Australia in a calendar year. So I want to talk about that. But I don't know. I mean, what do you think?
Well, part of it is, do you buy a new surfboard every country you go to, or do you try to travel with the surfboard? Because that seems like, it's the same thing as like traveling with golf clubs or any sort of other sort of unwieldy large item. Like the biggest cost assuredly would be like the plane tickets, like just flying from place to place and then doing that. Like they don't have a lot of earthly possessions to travel with. Just getting there from place to place is the big challenge. And if they're mostly beach bums, well, these aren't like mostly expensive places to stay once you're there anyway. So I'm going to say 15 to 20,000 at the most in plane tickets. It may be cheaper at the time.
A year.
Yeah. I think I'm overestimating there.
All right. So let me give you my breakdown.
Okay.
My breakdown is $25,000 a year for housing.
Okay.
And that includes a mix of hotel and other stays like that, and a lease of like 2 places. So I'm thinking they're basically leasing like a 2 or 3 bedroom house in 1 or 2 places, probably for like 8 months or a year or something like that. So they got like a lease on a place in Hermosa Beach. They got a lease on a place in Sydney or wherever, right? So $25,000 a year in housing, that's a little bit more than $2,000 a month, right? Then $1,000 a month, $12,000 in travel, I think annually is pretty reasonable for 4. So that's basically, $3,000 a guy annually. I think that's pretty good. For this is that time, $36K annually in food, partying, drinking, drugs. I think there's drugs. I don't know if they're using drugs much in the movie, but it's impossible for me to believe that these guys aren't using drugs. And then like another 15,000 for example. I think these 4 guys could live for under 90K annually, like a pretty eccentric lifestyle. That's not that much. That's you could rob that. So I say all that to say, like, does Keanu Reeves just like run a small law practice doing deeds and wills and things like that to rack up his 90K and sort of like private practice hourly fees and surf and live in a little place in Venice Beach? I don't know. I think I know this though. He's not going to be involved with any high stakes crime after that in any way. I don't think so.
No, me neither. I mean, I never assumed that. I did, but until this conversation, I didn't think too much about what was even going to happen after the movie. It's more confusing to me than anything that it's like, he just throws it away. I mean, he symbolically and actually throws the badge away. And I have no idea what he does. Maybe that's why they don't make a sequel, because nobody could decide what happens next.
I would say that he's reached nirvana. There is no need for any sequel. What is the single most confusing thing to you about the movie?
I mean, right. The first thing that comes to mind is just the idea that he gets lost in Tyler, that this becomes like a relationship that maybe this is just
like Tyler sexy? Let me interrupt you. Is Tyler sexy?
Unfortunately, no. But this is one man's opinion. Actually, I had thought this before, that I thought Lori Petty was like, in a band or something. I thought she was a musician turned actress, but I don't think that was the case. Like she's probably her biggest role is probably Tank Girl. She's Tank Girl.
No, Field of Dreams. Field of Dreams is by far.
Wait, she's in Field of Dreams? Oh,
yeah.
Is she the wife in Field of Dreams?
No. Sorry, not Field of Dreams. What's the one where the girls play baseball with Gina Davis?
Oh, A League of Their Own. A League of Their Own.
A League of Their Own. No.
That's
She's
yeah. You really? I was like, I thought, whoa, she has incredible range. I had no idea she played Kevin Costner's wife in Field of Dreams.
No, wrong one. But I can say for my wife was like, the girl from Field of Dreams was in, or wait, is it Field of Dreams? Which one is it? The girl from A League of Their Own did an action movie with Keanu Reeves. She was shocked that Point Break exists. So Tank Girl's definitely not on the radar. There's like a whole group of consumers who see her as like the lovable sister in not Field of Dreams, A League of Their Own.
Right. Okay. That's all right. And she's like, yeah, she's adorable, cute, lovable sister. I don't think of her as like the super attractive female ingenue. Actually, this is neither here nor there, but I have an image I want to show of the person I want to see more of in this movie. And that is, here's a screenshot I took, but yeah, this girl, the girl in the sandwich shop. Like there's not really a lot of females in the movie to start with. There's basically Lori Petty and this girl in the sandwich shop. And I want to see more of this girl.
There's the receptionist at the FBI. Yeah.
Yeah. So
the receptionist at the FBI is bringing big Kathryn Hahn vibes, like a decade before Kathryn Hahn. Like a sexy brunette. She's funny, husky voice. The single most confusing moment of the movie for me is how Johnny Utah played in the Rose Bowl, for which I assume he flew into LAX, which is literally right next to Marina Del Rey. So how did he fly into LA to play in the Rose Bowl without seeing the ocean? Now, I get that he only saw the ocean for the first time in his cover story, but in his cover story, he's also the star quarterback of the Rose Bowl. So what I want to know is, on the beach, why doesn't Tyler go, wait a minute, how the hell did you play in the Rose Bowl and miss the ocean?
Now, that's a fair point, but it's definitely not a point that you realize until you've watched the movie a few times.
That's fair. That's what's the single most confusing moment of the movie to me. You'd like to see Lori Petty recast. I get that. I think that we kind of get, I think the thing that is nice about Lori Petty is that she's a little bit of a version of a manic pixie dream girl, in that I think we can assume that there's a very different type of woman that Johnny Utah has probably dated for the most part in the past, that's super different from Tyler. And I think the first time we meet Tyler, even the way it's shot, it's a very weirdly sexy shot where she's kind of getting dressed in the street. She's putting on like torn jeans. She's not wearing a particularly sexy outfit, but she is attractive. It's maybe one of the better scored moments in the movie. I think she works. And I think it sort of works for her to be a very unique kind of attractive that's very different. And she's definitely a person of substance that is very much like, hey, I'm just here to give it right back to you. Like, she's kind of shitting on him until they are like together. Like, even when they're at the house party together, she's kind of being rude and mean and dismissive to him until they're together. So she's very much kind of like an equal, I would say. And I think that that's probably alluring. In 1991, who would you love to see in that role?
I'm not prepared for this question at all.
Winona Ryder. How about Winona Ryder?
Yeah, that's the answer.
Do you like Winona Ryder as Tyler?
91 Winona Ryder for sure. That's I'd watch that. I can't say that's better though. I can't say that like that would be. I mean, I do think that Lori Petty is a good fit in this role for all the reasons you mentioned. But you know,
I'd never want to recast it. I don't want anybody else. I love Lori Petty forever. Okay. But I think that there's a case to be made for Winona, who's got a similar kind of rambunctious energy, some like kind of I can hang with the boysy energy, you know. Swayze and Keanu, how do you feel about this? Because for me, Keanu is kind of forever defined by this role. And also, I see this as the more interesting version of Swayze's character from Roadhouse. In Roadhouse, he is the badass monk. But I think that the version of aesthetic lifestyle that he's living makes a lot more sense as this surfer dude monk than as the like backwoods bar bouncer monk. And so to me, this is kind of like the epitome of what was really interesting about Swayze as an action movie, as an action star. And then also Keanu as like kind of this very conscientious, thoughtful leading man. Again, everything's back to Hamlet, but Keanu, I think, very seriously takes on the burden of what it means to be alive in this movie. And that's kind of a hallmark of everything that he does later, all the way up into Neo. How do you think about this movie and the scale and in the span of their careers?
For both of them? I think, I mean, again, I haven't seen all the Patrick Swayze movies. I haven't seen all the Keanu movies, but I've seen way more Keanu movies than I've seen Patrick Swayze movies. I haven't even seen some of the key ones like Ghost. I've never seen Ghost before. if I've seen what the Dirty Dancing, I've only like seen it in the background. I've never like paid attention and watched it. I've seen Roadhouse, so I get those comparisons. But it seems like, you know, based on everything I read, like interviews and like about his actual life, you know, like for example, he was really into skydiving as an actual person. And there is at least one shot in here where he really does just jump out of the plane and he's
The
doing
adios
skydiving.
amigo, John.
Yeah, yeah.
That's real.
So it's probably like, it seems like it's very close to actually him. You know, I could see if someone actually told Patrick Swayze, you can't do something. I could see him screaming, no, 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 and just like losing it like he does in the last scene. That's like that delivery is so, again, like to go back, we've talked about this before, the idea of like Pierce Brosnan's quote about how actors are very vulnerable. They let people in. And it's like, that is to me a very vulnerable delivery because it doesn't make him come across as cool. It really just, he's coming across as like a whiny child who's being denied what he wants to do. And that it seems very honest. It seems very believable. So
yeah, he kind of allows Bodhi to be unmasked in that moment.
Yeah. So this is probably, until I see the rest of him, like this seems like the best Patrick Swayze role of all time. I also, you know, I haven't seen Next of Kin, that movie I showed you the other day of like, it's on the list. I want to see it. I have no idea how good it is, but it's from the same time period, roughly 1989. I think it's also interesting just about him personally, like after he was diagnosed, I believe, with pancreatic cancer. This is what Joe Rogan said the other day. Did you see this episode where Joe Rogan said he just started smoking cigarettes? As soon as he got this like terminal diagnosis, he just developed this, you know, a pack a day or more habit. It's like Joe's point was just like, well, why not? If you smoke them, if you got them, smoke them at that point.
Yeah. No, I think I think that makes sense in terms of what I sort of know and have read about Patrick Swayze and kind of his lifestyle. He took up surfing after the movie as well. Mm-hmm. So he was already into skydiving, and he does interviews later where he basically says, yeah, I had to learn to surf for Point Break and I was terrible at it, but I've surfed ever since. Keanu has surfed ever since and learned to surf for the movie. I think there's a little bit of a, you know, is Chuck Norris the guy that he is because of the roles, or were the roles because of the guy that Chuck Norris is? You know what I'm saying? And I think there's a little bit of that going on with Keanu and Patrick Swayze in real life where, you know, they literally take up some of these interests. They form this new relationship with the ocean. They start surfing. They understand, you know, it's a very unique kind of fusion that I think takes place moving forward. I wanted to bring up that this was, and you mentioned how quickly all those movies came out. He does film Point Break and then go back to shoot Bill and Ted. Mm-hmm. And one of the interesting results of that is that when they go to Bell's Beach, at that point, Keanu has grown his hair long for Bill and Ted, and Swayze has cut his hair short for a role. And so when they meet up again, they've reversed hairstyles a little bit because of the other projects that they were filming, but just sort of worked out in a fortunate way, which is the way that a lot of things about the movie worked out. You know, it was fortunate that somebody like James Cameron was in a relationship with Catherine Bigelow when she was doing uncredited script rewrites, and that, you know, they really collaborated on that in both of their, you know, descriptions of the process. And so I think that's really fortunate. But for Keanu, making this as he's emerging out of teen stardom with Bill and Ted, I think that this movie really sets the standard for the kind of adult actor he's going to be, which fuses some of his personal interest in Eastern philosophy and kind of this different way of being. And you see it in Speed. In Speed, he's the shoot the hostage, I'm wired a different type of way kind of guy. Obviously with Neo, who is kind of the epitome of like the conscientious action star in some way. And then, of course, with John Wick, you know, John Wick is sort of monk-like in the way that you might assume an adult Johnny Utah would be, you know?
Mhm.
So I don't know.
So for Keanu, like I can't answer as like definitively as I do for Patrick Swayze, where I think this is like the definitive Patrick Swayze role, as far as I know. For Keanu, like there's so many other roles like Neo or Ted, where, well, those two especially. So these three: Point Break, Johnny Utah, Ted Theodore Logan, and Neo from The Matrix. All of them. It
John
doesn't.
Wick.
Oh,
John Wick
sure.
belongs
Okay.
in the conversation, I think. For
Okay,
real.
that belongs
It's
in
going to
there.
be, it really does.
It's these, for any other actor, a single one of those would be like career defining, but it's not even so much that he's even reinventing himself, because it's still definitely the same guy each time. But it was like it was a tired sort of statement 20 plus years ago to make fun of Keanu Reeves not being able to act, or being a wooden actor, or being like miscast in things. Like he plays Jonathan Harker in Bram Stoker's Dracula, and that on the face of it seems strange. And he's also in, I think, not Hamlet, but he's in one of those Kenneth Branagh Shakespeare films.
Mm.
Do you remember which one that is? Like maybe it's Much Ado
No,
About
I don't know
Nothing.
which one. I think it is Much Ado About Nothing, actually.
And it's like it seems, again, just on the face of it, like bizarre to see him. But whatever it is, he's got it. He's got whatever the it factor is, because it's clear just from the first that hallway tracking shot with John C. McGinley early in this film. It's like parts of it seem like a bizarre performance, and maybe even like you could say like this is bad acting, or maybe it's bad on purpose because that's what the character needs. But it's watchable. I mean, he's got screen presence. You want to see what this guy's going to do next. If you hate him, if you like him, you want to see what he's doing. You want to watch him. And that's why, other people have said this. That's why he's a movie star, because it's not really a matter of being a good or bad actor. It's just a matter of you want to watch what this guy's doing.
And I think one of the things that this movie does is it fuses that natural charisma with physicality for both of those male leads, in that they're really captivating, but they're also able to be very physically captivating really throughout the movie. And the movie is shot, as I've said before, really acrobatically. There's even a really interesting shot early in the film when they're at the drop car, where Keanu is at the center of the frame, and as he stands up to get out of the drop car, the camera stands up with him. There's just a lot of shots like that that really uniquely demonstrate the physicality and combine like that really unique physical charisma, which Swayze has kind of this dance thing going on. But I think that there really is a combination of their physical charisma and then also their star charisma that makes this movie really work. It feels like LA the whole time. They shot it all on location, basically. The only stuff that's faked is the Australia stuff. And the look of it looks very Los Angeles to me. And I think shooting on film in Los Angeles is a big part of that. If they make this movie today, I don't know if it looks as good. Like it actually doesn't look as good.
Well, definitely not. And I think we could probably, again, we haven't watched it, but I'm going to guess without having watched the Point Break remake that it doesn't look as good. I mean,
it can't. There's no way. The interesting thing about that, this cinematographer really doesn't do a lot of great movies. Like, for example, the cinematographer of John Wick was previously winning Oscars for The Shape of Water. Like that's a really established cinematographer doing an action movie, which is not at all what's going on here. This guy is just kind of a regular dude. Like I think his biggest movie before this was Splash. You know what I mean? Like this is not like, he's not an artistic filmmaker. And so I give Bigelow a lot of the credit for the way that this movie looks, because I do think that some of her movies carry that over. Like when I watch this movie and I watch The Hurt Locker, it feels like they're from the same perspective in some kind of a way. I also feel like I really, really heavily see James Cameron in this filmmaking.
Well, you know,
Do you?
yeah, I thought though, up until a couple years ago, well, whenever I like actually paid attention to the credits, I thought this was a James Cameron movie. And part of that was because in Entourage season 2, when like they're doing the fake Aquaman movie, Vince goes to James Cameron's office and there's like a Point Break poster on the wall. And I just, for that reason, for years, just assumed, oh, that must be a James Cameron movie. Like he just must have directed it or
Yeah.
something.
Man,
So
that's so funny.
yeah, I was mistaken about that, obviously. But you know, I've only seen the big Kathryn Bigelow movies. I've seen this, I've seen The Hurt Locker, and we saw Zero Dark 30 together in the theater when that came out. But I've never seen this stuff before this. Like I think the vampire film is Near Dark, and there's a Jamie Lee Curtis cop film, Blue Steel, I think.
Never seen Blue Steel.
And
people say Blue Steel's good.
Yeah, but I just don't know. I mean, add it to the list, something to watch in the future. But this is easily my favorite Kathryn Bigelow movie. But I don't think they're bad, but I don't think like super highly of The Hurt Locker or Zero Dark 30. Although it is funny, just trivia wise, that, you know, if you Google James Cameron, Kathryn Bigelow marriage, like all the stuff that comes up as news stories from the 2010 Oscars, when she wins, I guess, Best Director, and he loses for Avatar, like, because they both had those big movies that came out the year before. And like all the stories are about how they're still friendly with each other, even though they divorced decades ago. And that's like, that's nice. That's heartwarming. It doesn't really mean anything, but.
Yeah, I would like to see Kathryn Bigelow make movies that are more like this and less like Hurt Locker and Zero Dark 30. I like those movies. I enjoy those movies. I'm not particularly bothered that, like, yeah, maybe they are a little bit propaganda or whatever. Although it's interesting because in theory, Hurt Locker is like very anti-war, and in some ways Zero Dark 30 is like pro. So is she really on some sort of a mission? I don't know. That's probably up for debate. But I'd like to see her make more movies like this. If I were to describe this movie to a friend, what I say is that Keanu Reeves plays the former star quarterback of Ohio State, who goes undercover with the FBI, learning to surf, to infiltrate a gang of surfing bank robbers that dress up as ex-presidents of the United States when they rob banks. If I were to say what this movie is about, to me, I would say this is a movie about a man understanding what it means to be an adult, while also pulling off some of the most radical stunts I've ever seen in my entire life. And like, I'd like to see her make more movies that are like these bizarre, you know, windows into, like, frankly, the white male masculine struggle, that are, you know, really deep and thoughtful, but also just full of stuff exploding. Like, I'd like to see her make more movies like that. In the criticism, they talk about her very unique ability to see some of the insecurities and the weird things about men and male-male relations. And I'd rather see her explore that in the next Fast and Furious movie than do another military movie. Like, I don't really want to see her do Zero Dark 32. I'd love to see her take on the dynamic between, you know, Vin Diesel and The Rock. That would be interesting.
That would be. So are you literally asking for Kathryn Bigelow to direct Furious 11?
I'm asking for that. Yeah, officially. Yeah, I'm officially asking.
I never considered that, but now I want that too. I mean, I think it's a given. Whenever we get 9 still coming next year, and then I assume 10 is also directed by Justin Lin, and then it's open for 11. And if they, or, well, what do you think? I mean, this is a bit of a tangent too. Neither one of us was a really big fan of the spinoff Hobbs and Shaw. Do you think she could make something out of a sequel to Hobbs and Shaw?
I don't think so.
Okay, all right. So that's just a lost cause.
All right. I think it's a lost cause. I think that she could make something out of The Gentleman. Have you seen The Gentleman?
No, I want to. I know that's out for home video now. I haven't seen it yet, but it's on the list. Should we do that next? Should we talk about that one for our next movie
Let's
review?
do The Gentleman next. This would be great. We're gonna go just hyper masculine bullshit exclusively here. But I'm fine with it. I'm okay. But yeah, no, I think that's it. I think that this movie is a little bit like Infinite Jest, and that there's a certain kind of guy that's particularly obnoxious, and this is their favorite movie. And I am that guy. I get it. But like, you know, I get that you read the Bhagavad Gita when you were in college, but you really don't understand what you're talking about. You just kind of like these things. Maybe you've done a little bit of yoga, but you don't even really pay attention to your breathing. But you'd love to tell people about what yoga is and this, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I get that I am this obnoxious guy, but it is what it is. And frankly, the Guy Ritchie fan base is not going to be, you know, it's not going to be too far removed from that. So we might be really exposing ourselves here. You've been talking Entourage. Are you concerned about that? This perception that we're creating? I'm not. I'm okay. I'm
the perception of us? No, I'm not concerned about that at all.
Okay.
But have we said, you think we've said our piece on Point Break?
No, I don't think we've said our piece on Point Break yet, because I think that in final summary of this movie, I'd like to get your favorite quote from the movie. Okay. I said that I think this is a really quotable movie. There's a lot of good quotes. Give me your top quote. And if you have to, you can give me one or two. I'm ready to go if you want me to go first.
I have three, but they're like in three different categories. There's like, I have the line, and we already said it, where I like the line. I like the delivery of the line. I want to use it in my own life. And that is when he says, I take the skin off chicken. Like, I just like that as a line, but like as a line that is more like, I guess, a philosophical statement. I like, I wrote this down. This was about us against the system that kills the human spirit. There's probably a better way to express that, but I like the underlining philosophy of that. Yeah. And then just, in terms of like late 80s, early 90s slang, I like the goofiness of the line, "God damn, you are one radical SOB."
Yeah, those are all great choices. I'll give you my favorite line. The one that makes me the most happy is Utah, give me two. That I could watch Gary Busey say Utah, get me two over and over and over again. And without fail, it makes me want a meatball sub. Mm-hmm. So Utah, give me two, I think is the best line. And eat a meatball sub. There's a lot of like food inspiration for me in this too, because Utah is getting the fish and fry, or the shrimp and fries. That's not an order I hear a lot, but I like it. The other, I think, really iconic line, aside from Utah, get me two, is "I am an FBI agent."
Right. Yeah.
I love that line. I think that's my runner-up if I had to pick a runner-up.
Yeah, those are good. I absolutely agree. I was lucky because like during that scene with the meatball subs, a pizza got delivered to our house.
Wow, that's great timing.
I didn't have to feel like, I really, because I feel the same way. Like I really want that kind of food, but luckily it was right there at that moment. So it worked out really fine. But yeah, like again, for people watching this, and if you haven't seen Point Break, if this for whatever reason is your first exposure to Point Break, hopefully this is a compelling enough conversation that you want to seek it out now and watch this movie. You will not be disappointed. Very solidly entertaining. I give it a thumbs up.
2 thumbs up.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts on this before we end the stream?
No, I think that's it. I'm happy to answer questions in the comments. Also, I think we'll link a great interview from Japan that Keanu and Patrick Swayze did. I won't spoil what's in that interview. And then maybe we'll also link Keanu talking about Point Break Live with Dan Patrick, because that was kind of funny too.
All right, good deal. I'll make sure to put those links into the description for the video. And it seems like next time we decided we're going to talk about The Gentleman.
We'll talk The Gentleman.
Look forward to that. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see everybody next time. So see you. All right, so we're still on the call.